Hi, my name is Jason T. Ingram. I'm from the Pacific Northwest originally, and I've been living with cognitive and different kinds of mental disorders for most of my life. I was diagnosed anywhere from bipolar 1, bipolar 2 with psychotic features, generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks, PTSD, ADHD, GAD, and whatever kind of disorders that might be developing in later life, especially early life, when it came to being very delusional. And it's interesting that I found sanity in my faith. And I also found a lot of crazy in my faith as well. So, having grown up in urban, progressive, educated culture, being introduced to born again Bible based Christianity in my early 20s and remaining in that for 12 years, and really getting to see it from the outside and really appreciating how amazing and dynamic these people are. And they are kind of socially nutty, and they really don't care so much about how people see them as far as their politically incorrect language, and being just very bold and upfront, and sometimes their honesty is a little gruff. It's just very refreshing coming from a hyper polite, don't say anything to offend people kind of culture that I grew up in. So there's a lot of things I appreciate about these folks. And I think if there was one alternative to mental health care, I think that this kind of Bible Christianity might have been the right thing for me at the time. It's just that as I look back and as I identify as a post Christian, and I meet other folks that have more of a Bible based ideology and worldview, is I noticed that a lot of people resemble a lot of symptoms of different mental disorders. Everything from dissociative disorders to hearing voices, of course, mood disorders, and basically believing in things that you don't have proof, which is really the essence of faith. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's not harming somebody. And I think that folks that grow up in a strong Bible influenced household, which is very similar to a very strong Quranic or maybe an Old Testament type of worldview, is that there are a lot of things that need to be explored and challenged in somebody's life if they're going to exit that, or if they're going to try to create a healthy faith environment for them, which really I don't know how to do, but I do raise a lot of questions. One of the things I like to say in this is that I think that atheists need to be open-minded to a faith-based worldview as much as people of faith really should be open-minded to a science-based worldview. Even a worldview of saying, hey, I need to be open to the fact that maybe there is no God, no creator, or maybe if there is, it's not some person that has a rule book and a bunch of demands. And a lot of the things that I challenge is not just types of Christianity, and I go from everything from the Unitarian Universalist Church, super liberal, like I grew up in UCC, and then a lot of those like MCC. I bash gay churches too, because I've been in a lot of those as well because of being a sexual minority and stuff like that. And of course, way over on the conservative with the revival, laughing, shouting, and dancing type churches. And I've been a part of some real extreme stuff. And so a lot of this people can't relate to. And a lot of times when I talk about harm in the church, it usually is, oh, Jason, well, that's what they did. But our church isn't like that. We're harmless. And in fact, they believe the same fundamental things about sexual minorities, about mental illness a lot of times, and how to treat it. And a lot of people are treating mental illness with a lot of faith-oriented stuff. And that might help people with acute disorders, but it can enable people who already have mental disorders. And a lot of this, especially when you get over into some of the extreme stuff, it could actually cause somebody to start hearing voices and to start dissociating and to start making some really bad choices and really doing a lot of crazy things and being abusive. I go into a lot of abuse, especially sexual abuse. That is number one. And of course, spiritual and religious abuse and stuff like that. And I decided ahead of time that I was really going to try to be careful to talk to people of faith, to embrace their faith, and then I end up pretty much bashing the very fundamentals of Christianity about, the world and us and human beings being evil, and we have to have something inside of us in order to make us worthy and good, and it comes through just a belief system and not necessarily, rights and wrongs. And then again, at the same time, there are a lot of rights and wrongs, even though there's this grace thing, and so trying to understand a lot of that stuff might be easy for some people. It's just, the way I see grace and a lot of these things, and when it comes down to it, I feel like I'm getting a free gift, and it costs me everything, though. And when it comes down to it, there are a lot of rules, although we're told it's not about rules, it's not about religion, it's about a relationship. And I go into a lot of that too, is it creates a lot of crazy when you're practicing something that you tell everybody this thing, and you have to say this label, and you're really doing something else. And everybody else knows it except the people in the church. It's kind of like walking into a church and you see white walls and everybody's looking and going, ooh, it's blue. And they pass out these blue glasses and I put them on and I go, oh, it's blue, And so it seems like in order to really experience what the book of Acts and the works of Jesus and some of the prophets of the Old Testament and some of the really intense, like the spiritual, the supernatural stuff that I think is really what the Bible is all about. You really kind of have to drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and really go in head first. And I did have some lucid moments, and I'm glad I did, because if I just stood back watching all these people do all these goofy things, I would have never understood it. But I understand, at least I hope so, where they're coming from, and based on the experiences that I had, and based on the level of devotion, and I don't want to brag or go into it because people that see me as a post-Christian would really doubt that I really even had a legitimate and a life-changing and powerful conversion experience. And if I did, how would I exit that? Well, it took me almost 10 years to do that. It took me introducing things on a yearly basis into my life that I used to believe were evil and harmful. Some people, they can take the plunge, but a lot of times, and I go into this compartmentalization stuff too, because split personalities and stuff like that is a lot of what people are creating. And one of the things I like to bash, that nobody bashes enough, is Celebrate Recovery. They're doing the work of mental health stuff. Like a lot of churches are doing stuff that resembles mental health. And at the same time, they're creating a lot of crazy, and they're imitating a lot of crazy. And they're really good at reformed criminals, and I appreciate that. In fact, they're better than just about anybody at handling folks that have come out of prison, because they're strong people. They're in a lot of ways very fearless, and in some ways they're viewed as being very fearful. It's just that they have a whole different set of priorities of what they're afraid of and the things that they're not afraid of. And in fact, their priorities are so different when it comes to so many issues and so many characteristics. When you go from a liberal church to a conservative church, or anytime you go from, especially in the Western world, and you got these dividing issues like abortion and gays and immigration and stuff like that, you'll typically see people that have that mix of right-wing stuff, like firearms, and when it comes to, do you kneel at the national anthem at football things, and some of the stuff that's going on here these days, and then you got the Black Lives Matter kind of people, and they're very divided, very, very divided. And it's really sad that they are, because I think Christians are awesome, whether they have a liberal or a conservative type view. And I see good and bad points with both of the folks on the canyon. And I've had a lot of dealings with both. And having been a musician and have toured different places around the country and been overseas and done some mission work, and I've stayed with a lot of ministerial families, a lot of pastors and their families. And I tell you, you don't have to be crazy. You don't have to have a mental illness in order to exhibit some really crazy behavior or develop or even learn, or you watch a lot of crazy and you just sort of do as the Romans do, so to speak. And so I talk about this thing a lot, and I notice this in my life as I travel and I talk to a lot of different people, and I see a lot of behaviors that resemble mental illness. And I say this to myself, hey, I'm supposed to be the crazy one. Why are they doing that? It doesn't make any sense. And then there's the whole thing of born-again Bible churches can often be the most available community that will accept folks that live with mental disabilities. And I'm talking about some severe mental disabilities. And even the conservative churches, because they're strong enough to handle that a lot, can attract a lot of those folks, because there might not be like a mental health drop-in center or something like that, or they're just bored, and mentally ill people have a hard time making friends, and so it attracts a lot of antisocial people, but a lot of people that need to be included that wouldn't necessarily be. Now, with more of the Bible-based stuff, yeah, we like to question their motives for getting people in there, because a lot of times they think, if I don't get this person into my church and follow something that's as close to my form of Christianity as possible, I'm afraid that they're going to spend this eternity with this being tortured and tortured and tortured, and that accountability is going to come on me. And so people live with all this guilt, and it creates a lot of codependency and a lot of strife in relationship and families too. And I talk about a lot of things that I've seen with kids growing up with these hyper-ministerial families, whether they're volunteering or whether they're actual clergy. And I repeat a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again. And so you can watch 1 or 2 episodes and pretty much get the gist of what I'm saying. You don't have to watch the dozen or more that I'm doing. And then I cuss a lot. And so it seems like the more episodes I do, the more of a potty mouth talking like a sailor I do. And I realize that, this series might not be geared towards the person in the church, but for folks that are exiting those types of communities, especially sexual minorities, and folks that have lived with cognitive disorders like I have, or anything that makes them feel like they can't make friends in their church communities, or to the point like me where I had a suicide attempt that had to do directly with church influence stuff that made it to where, hey, I either have to die, or I have to change my theology, or I'm going to have to live this double fake life where I have one thing that's fundamentally myself, but I am living at the same time as a different person in this compartmentalized thing, which is another form of crazy. And I'm glad that I wasn't able to really live that kind of double life, although I've seen it so many times, and how that creates a lot of abuse and a lot of crazy, and a lot of folks don't really know how to deal with that. A lot of folks don't know how to address that. And so I talk about a lot of that stuff, and it gets pretty graphic at times as well. And I'm already getting some comments on it. And I don't want to call these comments crazy, but from my perspective, I didn't delete some of the comments in some of my videos, because I think that they really portray how a lot of people of faith respond to folks that and different opinions that will oppose and challenge their views, which is precisely what I'm doing. And my thing wasn't really to tear down religion and insult religious people and people of faith, but just to tell my story and to keep talking about how we don't have to have a lot of crazy if we're going to be a person of faith. And we have the free choice to challenge our faith and even walk away from it if that's the best thing for our life. And maybe if that happens and you start with a clean slate, that you can find a healthy community of healthy ideology or a healthy worldview that will make you less crazy.